everybody, and welcome to our afternoon reading. We'll have Susan Mitchell and Campbell McGrath reading for you this afternoon. I know you're all very excited. We've been looking forward to this since we put the festival together. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our director, Miles Kuhn. You can give him a big round of applause. He's been working tirelessly.
Hello, everybody. Again, I welcome you to the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. I'm just thrilled and delighted to see all of you here for this afternoon's reading. Nick Carbo is going to be introducing Susan Mitchell first, and then Susan will read, and then there'll be a short break, and then Nick will come back and introduce Campbell McGrath. After the reading, in the Ocean Breeze room to the left of the theater, down at the end of the hall, is where the signing will take place. Nick is the author of 3 collections of poetry, the latest being Andalusian Dawn. He has edited 3 groundbreaking anthologies of Filipino and Filipino-American writing, returning a borrowed tongue, Babylonian, and Pinoy poetics. His visual poems have been exhibited in Harvard University's Infinity Visual Poetry Show. He has taught in the MFA programs at the American University, Columbia College, Chicago, and the University of Miami. His poems have been featured in National Public Radio's Morning Edition and the PBS program Heritage. It's my delight and pleasure to welcome Nick Carbo.
Ooh, I'm glad a whole bunch of you came out for this afternoon's reading. It is a pleasure to introduce both Susan and Campbell this afternoon. When a very young Susan Mitchell met Robert Lowell, he asked her if she knew any other languages or if she could play a musical instrument. She answered yes to both questions. Lowell reportedly said, "Good. If you find you can't really write, you can always translate. If you find you can't really translate, you can always be a musician." Lowell, if somewhat of a killjoy, was perhaps being kindly pragmatic, but Susan Mitchell was destined to become the poet she is today, with or without Lowell's encouragement. Susan went on to earn her BA in English Literature at Wellesley College as a Wellesley College scholar. She then received an MA from Georgetown University and an ABD from Columbia University. She's taught at Vermont College, Middlebury College, and Northeastern Illinois University, where she was poet in residence. She has served as the associate editor of Provincetown Arts, a contributing editor of the New England Review, Breadloaf, and a copy reader at Time magazine. She now holds the Mary Blossom Lee Chair at Florida Atlantic University. She is the author of 3 books of poems: The Water Inside the Water, Eroticon, and Rapture, which won the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Prize and was a National Book Award finalist. Her awards for poetry include fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Lannan Foundation. Susan's work has been compared to Erica Jong's for its sexual bravura, and Diane Wachowski's for its offbeat associative leaps. She has a penchant for onomatopoeia and sprung rhythm. Tony Hoagland has written that Susan has, quote, an exhibitionist chutzpah, end quote. Her language is beautiful, mischievous, transformative. Hers is a poetry of orality and liquidity, a poetry wanting to be read aloud. Please help me welcome Susan Mitchell.
Thank you, Nick, for that introduction. I'm going to be reading new work, older work, newest work, and I'm going to start with a poem that came out in Best American Poetry that Rita Dove edited, and it's called Lost Parrot. She can cry his name from today to tomorrow. She can Charlie him this, cracker him that. There in the topmost, he hangs like a Christmas ornament, his tail a cascade of emeralds and limes. The child is heartsick. She has taped messages to the mailboxes, the names he responds to, his favorite seeds. At twilight, she calls and calls. Oh, Charlie, you went everywhere with her, to the post office and the mall, to the women's room at the Marriott, where you perched on the stall, good-natured, patient. And didn't you love to take her thumb in your golden beak and squeezing tenderly, shriek and shriek as if your own gentleness were killing you? You were her darling, her cinnamon stick, her pedagogue. You knew her secret names in Persian and Greek. At the beach, you had your own chair, an umbrella. Oh, pampered bird, the neighbors sympathize, but what's love compared with wild red fruit, a big gold moon, and an evening that smells of paradise? If she were older, she'd join the other sad girls for drinks. She'd lick the salt from her tequila glass and say something wise she'd heard said 100 times before. Love is a cage she's glad to be free of. Oh, Charlie, you were her Pope and popinjay, her gaudy, her flambeau, her magnificat. You were the postcard each morning delivered to her room, her all-day sunset. In the topmost fronds, you squall and squawk to the other flashy runaways. Say paradise, no dice, no dice. The next couple of poems are from my book, Rapture, and this one is called Bus Trip. All across America, children are learning to fly. On a bus leaving New Hampshire, on a bus leaving Colorado, I sat next to a child who had learned how to fly, and she carried her flying clenched inside both fists. She carried her flying in a suitcase and in a stuffed dog made of dirt, and the places where she had stood all night listening to the rain. A child sits on the roof of a house. She dangles first one leg, then the other, as if she were thinking of how America looks late at night through the windows of a bus. From a woman across the aisle, she borrows a mirror. From a woman in the back, a lipstick. Keep it, a voice says. From a man, she takes a cigarette, which she taps against her thigh. The man closes his eyes over her body, such a small body. He could lift it to his mouth with one hand. In a bathroom, she buys a comb with a quarter borrowed from me and insists I write down my name and address so she can return it from L.A. or from Chicago or from wherever it is. Someone she hasn't met yet is waiting for her. In the dark of the bus, she combs her hair. And what she says to me is a song that takes only 3 minutes to hear, which I accept like a stick of gum. Now you tell me the songs you like best, she says, and I do. Nick mentioned that I taught at Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago, and there are in this next film called A Story a couple of bars. One of them is in Chicago. One of them is in New York, where I grew up. Are there any New Yorkers in this audience? A couple. Okay. The bar no longer exists, but you might have known it at one time. It was way up on Broadway at 110th, and it was called the Brass Rail. So, for anybody from the West Side, A Story. There is a bar I go to when I'm in Chicago, which is like a bar I used to go to when I lived in New York. There are the same men racing toy cars at a back table, the money passing so fast from hand to hand, I never know who's winning, who's losing. Only in the New York bar, the racers sport Hawaiian shirts, while in the Chicago bar, they wear Confederate caps with crossed gold rifles pinned to their bands. Both bars have oversized TVs and bathrooms you wouldn't want to be caught dead in, though some have. Once in the New York bar, I watched a film on psychic surgery, and I swear to you, the surgeon waved a plump hand. The hand hovered like a dove over the patient's back, and where wings grow out of an angel's shoulders, a liquid jetted, a clear water, as if pain were something you could see into, like a window. Later, walking home with a friend who was also a little drunk, I practiced psychic surgery on our apartment building, passing my hands back and forth over the bricks. I don't know what I expected to happen. Maybe I hoped a pure roach anguish would burst forth. But there was only the smell that rises out of New York City in August, a perennial urine, dog, cat, human, the familiar stench of the body returning to itself as alien. Sometimes, before stopping in at the Chicago bar, I would either sleep or go for a walk, especially in October, when the leaves had turned red. As they swept past me, I thought of my blood starting to abandon my body, taking up residence elsewhere, like the birds gathering in feverish groups on the lawns. In the Chicago bar, there were men who never watched TV or played the video games. Mainly from the Plains tribes, they sat in silence over their whiskey, and looking at them, I could even hear the IRT as it roared through the long tunnel between Borough Hall and Wall Street, the screech of darkness on steel. And it happened one night that a man, his hair loose to his shoulders, stood up and pulled a knife from his boot. And another man, who must have been waiting all his life for this moment, stood up in silence too, and in seconds, one of them was curled around the knife in his chest as if it were a mystery he would not reveal to anyone. Sometimes I think my life is what I keep escaping. Staring at my hands, I almost expect them to turn into driftwood, bent and polished by the waves, my only proof I have just returned from a long journey. The night Tom Littlebird killed Richard Highwater with a knife no one knew he carried, not even during the 5 years he spent at Stateville, I thought of men and women who sell their blood for a drink of sleep in a doorway, or for a bus ticket into a night which is also a long drink to nowhere. And I thought of the blood I was given when I was 19, one transfusion for each year of my life, and how I promised myself, if I lived, I would write a poem in honor of blood. First, for my own blood, which, like the letter that begins the alphabet, is a long cry, A, of relief. Praise to my own blood, which is simple and accepts almost anything. And then for the blood that wrestled all night with my blood until my veins cramped and the fingers of one hand went rigid. Praise to the blood that wanted to remain alone, weeping into its own skin, so that when it flowed into me, my blood contracted on the knot in its throat. For you who raised a rash on my arms and made my body shiver for days, listen, whoever you are. This poem is for you. I'm switching over to eroticon now. When I was 11, my mother took a photograph of me. I was swinging on a swing that was hanging from the branch of an apple tree that was in the backyard of one of my aunts. And I always had high hopes for photographs people took of me, and I was invariably disappointed. I took one look at this one, and I think the shock of it was what propelled me into adolescence. My mother used to say about my reaction that went on for years and years that I would know I was fully grown up when my feelings changed about that photograph. So every decade, I would take it out and check, am I grown up yet? No, you're not grown up yet. Finally, one day, I knew I was grown up because I wrote this poem, which starts out identifying with the 11-year-old, but as the poem goes on, it shifts, because I had the very strange feeling when I'd finally grown up that this was a girl who could understand anything anyone would tell her and accept it, and I wanted to put my head in her lap. And then I thought, what a terrible thing to do to a child. Adults are supposed to nurture children, not the other way around. So this is called Girl Tearing Up Her Face. Where it's rubbed out, start there. Where it's torn, where something like a burn in cloth, the hot metal pressed too long, forgotten in paper, the wormhole, the eaten up, the petal frayed, browning at the edges, the flower's flesh like cigarette paper, consumed by the breath, sucked back into the body. Yes, body. That is what. No, I'm not stalling. Body is what I mean to talk about, what I have on my mind in my mind in the body of the body. And what's disturbing? Yes, that above all, the joy right there in her face, the girl's, as if she had been smacked with it. The big fish joy, a cold, hard, wet smack by something flailing out, this joy thing throwing itself around, or as if someone had thrown a pudding, a thick batter, and now her face was trying to work its way through that mess. Yes, joy, the mess, the ugliness of it, because it has not yet been practiced. The mouth trying out positions before the mirror, the mouth performing little sounds up and down the scale of pleasure, the joy not yet prepared for anyone else to look at. The shock, like a flashbulb going off, a camera pouncing before one is ready, before one has run the tongue over, taken a bite out of a smile, hands arranging the hair. The girl looks all doors open, the sheer weight of her coming starting to come and her body sucking it back, inhaling each tooth of bliss, running her fingers up and down the comb. It's that ugly I want to rub my face in, that blossoming, as if a tree had suddenly, the stamen pushing up out of the petals, the throat of the apple, its woods, and the dark seeds bursting the blossom. So I push her back. I open her mouth right there where she sits on the swing, a rage of delight shivering the trees. Can I say flesh? Can I say skin? And I can't bear to look at her doing that. It seems too private, as if she had been caught having a dream she didn't know she was having. All her wings run over by pleasure, joy having a tantrum all over her, this limp rag of beaten down, and the photographer thinking, yeah, this is it, the moment he wants to last and last, the forever. Now with a girl falling asleep on the swing, her sleep in full view, its lids pulled open so the deep anesthesia of her pleasure is suddenly visible, sucked inside out so he can hear every sound a face can make. And it's those sounds he wants to shut her down on, those cries with the flesh still attached, and what they have been pulled from, gaping and ragged. And this is what will be handed to the girl in black and white, this face that in 2 seconds would have changed and gone on changing, this face she never suspected. And of course, she'll have to rip it into pieces and keep ripping, because even now I can't bear to look at her suddenly awake. I want her asleep again, unbegun, unstarted, the shades drawn so I can float every which possible, all manner of her across her face, accommodating as a lap. And I don't think, for God's sake, she's only 11. What does she know or understand of anything? I'm flooding, even as she rips herself in two, even as she vows never to be this person. I'm putting my head down in her lap, pushing her back on the swing with so much force. What could split open? What could eat her up? There is in this book a long poem called Eroticon, and I'm going to read you some lighter passages, some fun passages from this poem. One way of thinking about it is the experience of a reader enjoying a story, in this case the story of Cupid and Psyche, and not reading the book the way one is taught to read the book in school or at university, just reading it for pleasure. And the other way to think about this is somebody on the internet, sort of in going to various websites and seeing what they find there. So some of the characters that come into this is as if the book has been translated into characters on a website and the whole story is being retold for the internet. Darkness was the main character. Wings was another, and tango. Reading, I could feel how the writer had rolled the darkness between his thumb and forefinger, how he smelt up all its furs and furbelows, smoked its cigars. I would watch him in his room alone with the darkness, stroking. This was how he got worked up to write. My reading was interposed like an extra heartbeat, an arrhythmia, a tachycardia of listening. This happened on the expressway too, and in malls. It kept fuming through him, the darkness, which he pressed to his mouth like wet panties, like black lipstick. After he does it with a real girl, he does it with the other one in the story, or with both of them together, the one with wings lying there on the bed. The girl in the story shines and glares all over his body like headlights, like wings beating. The glare of her seeing shivering up his body, and his eyes all gummed with darkness, cocooned, the wings drenched after he comes, matted, the feathers. That place deep in where Plato said the soul begins, cutting its teeth on pleasure, the pleasure raw and bloody from the effort. When they come together, they fragment. First the girl, then the one with the wings. His feathers as when a bird is shot, the bird body pulling apart in the air. That's called orgasm. Or he is up above looking down on her, so far away he thinks she is tied to a cliff. He's up where the dome is, where the oculus, or as if he were a hawk and she the prey. She feels it pull between her legs and breaks up in his mouth like shrapnel. Then she comes together again, and he breaks up. And the one thinking this in malls, thinking there aren't enough tenses for all this to happen in, the past and the present fragmenting as they bop off one another. There aren't enough words for darkness to make it different each time. Darkness with smell and without smell. Darkness with tall buildings, the blades rubbing against one another, getting worked up. The darkness getting bigger, reaching the tops of skyscrapers, and the one driving the expressway or huddled under a blanket in the plane. There are, said Tango, and think of this as names on a website. There are, said Tango, 27 kinds of seeing. Or did she mean 27 kinds of wings? Wings with fluff and wings without fluff. Wings inebriated with flight and wings descended into their sacks, retracted. The mirror positioned in such a way that looking and gawking and peeping, and even pinhole rooms where a single drop of vision was enough, the body suddenly overexposed. Though of course, said Tango, there is also looking with the mouth open, the mouth like a third eye, as if two eyes were not enough, and now a third, a fourth, a fifth, an argosy of eyes, like the tail of a peacock spread far and wide. Tango wanted eyes all over her body, but especially an eye between her legs, a great cyclopean eye blinding her with its salivas and dilations. Think of those lenses an optometrist clicks into place, one over the other as his head looms close in the dark. Is it better this way or like this? Oh yes, like this, like this. Now it's all so clear it hurts. Yes, unbearable, but sharper, with a brightness of Yankee Stadium flood-lit, with hoses of light at full force. Yeah, and why not, thinks the one gliding the expressway, gliding the burning rubber, the acrylic and ammonia. Sometimes this happens with oil refineries to the right and oil refineries to the left. Now he reaches to where it's happening, through bridges and tunnels, with a far lane blocked, with eyes of the mind, with eyes turned inward on stems of intellect, straining back into the brain where a wick burns round the clock. Oh, there. With stems of intellect stretched taut, with eyes tuned up until there begins to open an inside. Oh yes, eyes of no color opening. It was love, that sent eyes into the world, love that knocked holes in the skull and shoved the tongue out. In there, something for which no experience exists. Oh, polish it, burnish, and yes, something like fingers are rubbing, massaging. Keep at it. Rubbing makes it visible, a form, antler grown from the skull, cold prong of sharpness, spicule, barb, an idea. Oh, idea sealed off like a tomb, as if a kiss with long velvet gloves were stalking, sneaking up on the darkness, starting to thaw. to wake up like a gong, the darkness gaining consciousness. Oh, give it to me, the full glare of that looking. Shall I call it psyche, that looking? Shall I call it soul? Those eyes, new cut, sharp and ferocious as shark teeth. Or what shall I call it? The darkness popping open. And I'm going to end with something new, a very Florida poem called Song with 13 Ibis. Where the earth is beaten to mud, rain pummeled, they dig in, scud and scrum. In ponds at the edges, in rain slummed down, the coral scimitar, that part of them which survives flesh, they dig with it. White, of course, white of the primed canvas, field of white moving across the field quickly now in the parking area over the scorched cement, quickly to the shade of huge trees, a cloud, a single body with 26 legs, 26 wings, unearthing, fusty armoires, boxes of drier smells, coffins, coffers broken into, the scimitars black at the tips, mud-caked, and humming as they dig, humming and eating, they bore down into a song, unchanging, the hum digging down to whatever it is down there. Is it humming or singing too, or vibrating? Its single tone giving it away, its cries of pleasure as it takes in and in, the song passing from mouth to mouth. And some of this is audible to me, and some I've guessed at, surmised, so I don't know the whole song, what the pit sings out, what the worm spitting earth sings to earth.